Imagine if you lived on a farm in the highlands that your ancestors passed down for millennia. Your history and identity were so intertwined with its peaks and valleys that you said, "We are our mountains." Everywhere you turned, there were churches, cemeteries, and other monuments that were over millennia old and connected to your ancestors. Then one day, you came home to find that your new neighbor had invaded your farm, killed your son, raped your wife and daughter, and claimed your home as his. To exacerbate the situation, he also blamed you for the attack and was destroying all evidence of your ancient existence and was trying to convince the world his version of the events. That is the reality that Armenians of Artsakh live with. But who will the world listen to? In 1915, the Ottoman Turks exterminated 1.5 million Armenians from their historic homeland during the Armenian Genocide. So how is it possible for a second genocidal attack and ethnic cleansing to be unleashed on the Armenians? Now, just over a century later, Turkey, the successor government of the Turkish Ottoman Empire that committed the Armenian Genocide, is actively assisting its strategic ally, Azerbaijan, in carrying out a new ethnic cleansing. Already, thousands of Armenians have been massacred. These were women and children. They were young and they were old. There were men who had families. There were human beings who had dreams and personal stories that were cut too short by unspeakable violence. Analyzing Azerbaijan's invasion of Artsakh and Russia's invasion of Ukraine, one wonders, when did it become okay for the world to watch and do nothing while burgeoning new genocidal assaults against innocent people are carried out? Well, where do I start?
I've been speaking out about the current situation in Armenia and Artsakh.
So what they were there? Removing Armenian civilians from their ancestral homeland in Artsakh.
I spent months watching the horrors of Armenians being slaughtered, beheaded, and violated in unimaginable ways, all while witnessing the international community's deafening silence. While Azerbaijan was targeting civilians, bombing maternity hospitals, schools, and residential neighborhoods, the world's so-called leaders were absent and mute. The international press was just as indifferent for the most part. Worse, some media outlets became Azerbaijan government's mouthpieces. They regurgitated Azerbaijan's lies, fallacies, and disinformation. With a few exceptions, the world media has failed to accurately report the atrocities, instead resorting to reckless both-sidism, false balance, and flat-out bias. Soon it became obvious that I needed to be in Armenia in order to document this 21st century slaughter. If I didn't interview the eyewitnesses, the veterans, and the refugees created by the Azerbaijani and Turkish war crimes, who would? So I went to my motherland. I interviewed officials, experts, and journalists there. I had to see for myself exactly how Azerbaijani President Aliyev and Turkish President Erdogan, a pair of dictators and self-professed brothers, are pulling the wool over the world's eyes and in the process, getting away with mass murder. I don't know if anyone intends to be an activist before they are one. We are activated by witnessing cruelty, injustice, and victimization. Due to our history and background, some of us have wounds that are fresh enough to trigger a movement. Observing the largely indifferent attitude of international bodies, Armenians around the globe had to mobilize once again. While growing up, I felt different for many reasons. I felt like an outsider due to my ethnicity, national origin, and sexual orientation. These were the cards that I was dealt, and I was going to play them. But I was keenly aware of being marginalized. As a journalist and an activist, I've pushed back against racism, homophobia, transphobia, anti-Black racism, anti-Semitism, mistreatment of migrants, sexism, the war on labor unions, and other forms of oppression and prosecution. Later, my ethnicity as an Armenian-American and my sexual orientation were reasons to fight against prejudice, homophobia, and marginalization. The common thread was irrational hatred because someone is simply different. Reading about the Armenian Genocide, I knew what it meant to be hated for who you are and how autocratic nations can turn genocidal and attempt to exterminate their minorities. The Armenian Genocide was the first modern genocide, but sadly it wasn't the last. What followed was the Holocaust, then the Rwandan, Cambodian, Chilean, Darfur, and other genocides. But nothing I had experienced, witnessed, or even read had prepared me for what was unleashed on the Armenians of Artsakh, also known by its now outdated name Nagorno-Karabakh, starting on September 27, 2020. But I digress. I must start at the beginning, tell you about the glorious Artsakh to give you some background and context for what you're about to watch. Russia annexed Artsakh at the conclusion of the Russian-Persian War of 1804-1813. Renamed by the Soviets as Nagorno-Karabakh more than a century later, Artsakh has been an integral part of Armenia. That fact is traceable to the 9th century BCE. Today, Artsakh remains nearly 100% populated by ethnic Armenians. The Armenian Genocide of 1915 saw the Ottoman Turks exterminate 1.5 million Armenians from their ancestral homeland. A few years later, Soviet dictator Joseph Stalin gave the newly formed Azerbaijan Soviet Socialist Republic a sinister gift. Azerbaijan as a state was established in 1918 for 2 years before it became part of the Soviet Union in 1920, and its body of law for 70 years was Soviet legislation. Even in that short period of Azerbaijan's existence, Artsakh was not part of it. In fact, the League of Nations, the predecessor of the United Nations, rejected Azerbaijan's application for membership because of the inconsistency of its borders and lack of clarity on its actual territory. Azerbaijan at the time had claims over Artsakh, but Artsakh in that period was a sovereign entity. Responding to economic blackmail from oil-rich Azerbaijan, as well as Turkish threats of aggression, Stalin thumbed his nose at international law and his own country's Bureau of Communist Party, which just a day earlier had confirmed Artsakh's rightful status as part of Armenia. In 1921, Stalin placed Artsakh under Azerbaijani control. For 70 years, the Armenians of Artsakh under Azerbaijani rule were subject to oppression, discrimination, violence, and brutality. But Armenians' complaints to the Russian Communist government, parent power charged with ensuring the well-being of all Soviet citizens, fell on deaf ears. The current phase of the Artsakh conflict began in 1988. In response to self-determination claims of Artsakh's people, Azerbaijani authorities organized massacres of the Armenians of Artsakh. Ethnic cleansing of the Armenian population began to be inflicted across Artsakh and across the border throughout the entirety of Azerbaijan, particularly in Sumgait, Baku, and Kirovabad. Over 30,000 Armenians were massacred in the pogroms. Irina, for those that have never heard about it or not much, what is Artsakh? Where is Artsakh?
Not much is heard about Artsakh, specifically with its Armenian name. It's better known as Nagorno-Karabakh, and to the world it is known mostly because of the conflict. When Soviet republics were assembled, they had different administrative borders. There were republics within republics, there were oblasts, and there were autonomous oblasts. So at the time, Nagorno-Karabakh was assigned an administrative status called the Autonomous Oblast, which had more autonomy than regular oblasts or provinces, as they were called. So it was heavily Armenian populated region that was assigned to the Soviet Socialist Republic of Armenia. It was assigned by a decision of a so-called Caucasus Bureau. But within days, the decision was unilaterally reversed by Stalin. And Armenians throughout the Soviet era attempted to redress this injustice, and Stalin kind of put a taboo on this topic. So sometime around 1947, Armenians felt emboldened to bring this issue to the agenda. It was shut down immediately. In the 1950s, 1960s, actually twice, Armenians of Stepanakert, Nagorno-Karabakh, brought this political issue to the central authorities' agenda, stating that we want to reunify back with the Armenian Soviet Socialist Republic. Right. It was struck down again in 1980s when Gorbachev came to power and they started the period of glasnost and perestroika. Armenians again felt emboldened that, well, now there's transparency, we can make ourselves heard, which again was shut down, but this time around in a very, I would call it criminal way, because what happened is the first trigger was unfortunately the pogroms in Sumgait and Baku that led to morbid killings of Armenians in those two Azerbaijani cities, women, children, elderly. At the time, still Soviet authorities, together with Baku, organized a so-called Operation Ring, or in Russian, Artsakh, which was, to be politically correct and historically accurate, was essentially an attempt at ethnic cleansing of Armenians from certain parts of Artsakh, and they succeeded. Basically, it was a punishment of central authorities to Armenians in making themselves heard and wanting to be reunited with Armenia.
As a non-Armenian who's been going to Artsakh, what's your perspective on Artsakh, the people, the land?
As you know, the land is historically Armenian. Some of the oldest Armenian churches and various sort of evidence that Armenians have been there for centuries and centuries. And when Stalin took his policy of creating oblasts and relocating people in regions in not very friendly context, of course, Artsakh was cut off from Armenia and put inside Azerbaijan. And then since then, they've had a difficult time.
On December 10, 1991, the population of Artsakh declared the establishment of the Artsakh Republic by plebiscite, taking care to fully comply with both international law and globally accepted democratic norms, as well as the letter and spirit of USSR's own laws of the time. The act was widely seen as legally binding. Thus, on the territory of the former Azerbaijani SSR, two equal states were created: Artsakh Republic and the Republic of Azerbaijan. Congressman Sherman, you've been very vocal with your support for the Armenians of Artsakh standing up against what Azerbaijan and Turkey did. In fact, you've called on Congress to implement the Magnitsky sanctions against the officials in Azerbaijan. Will you tell me about that?
Armenian territory has been reduced to a small Armenian state and an even smaller Republic of Artsakh. The Republic of Artsakh was technically part of the Republic of Azerbaijan as a result of actions taken by Joseph Stalin. He deliberately drew the borders in the Caucasus to make more conflict and to put populations within another ethnic community's Soviet Socialist Republic. And he assigned the region of Karabakh to Azerbaijan. So the Republic of Azerbaijan says, it's ours, Joseph Stalin gave it to us. And that's perhaps a rather bad reason for a country to assert its right itself over a territory inhabited by ethnic Armenians who, if they ever were under the sovereignty of the Azerbaijan government, would be persecuted, if not killed.
Azerbaijani officials fumed and immediately declared war on Artsakh. The ensuing attack by Azerbaijan resulted in the deaths of tens of thousands of people. Then in May 1994, Azerbaijan, Artsakh, and Armenia signed a ceasefire. The parties entered into negotiation to settle the conflict. Overcoming Azerbaijani intransigence seemed impossible at first. Finally, in 1991, under the auspices of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, Minsk Group, led by Russia, France, and the United States, the Paris Principles were agreed and formalized in the Key West document. Congressman Schiff, thank you again for doing this.
My pleasure.
What is your assessment and perception about where we are now?
For years, Azerbaijan provoked violence along the line of contact, and many of us in Congress, through successive administrations, urged our State Department to forcefully push back, call out Azerbaijan for its belligerence and its provocative acts. And the most that we could get was statements of moral equivalence. We call on both sides to cease any further violence. We call on both sides to peacefully resolve the differences.
In the fall of 2020, the world was distracted by COVID-19, and the US was further preoccupied by the presidential election. Less than a year after the US House of Representatives and the Senate recognized the Armenian Genocide, perpetrated by the Ottoman Turks, who killed 1.5 million Armenians in their ancestral land, on September 27, 2020, Azerbaijan, with help from Turkey, orchestrated a new genocidal attack and ethnic cleansing against the civilian population of Artsakh. As we've already learned, Azerbaijan only became a sovereign state when the USSR collapsed in 1991. Artsakh was never a part of an independent Azerbaijan. Since 1994, when a ceasefire was declared, Azerbaijan's autocratic regime, first through President Heydar Aliyev, then his son, current President Ilham Aliyev, has been preparing for and committing renewed assaults on Artsakh.
Azerbaijan geared up for this war for 26 years, and there's a reason for it, because they covered every aspect of what would be required in order for them to prevail. I've known for years that while Azerbaijan is preparing, and has been preparing for decades on every level, industrial, military, technological, financial, economic, know-how, training of soldiers, the quality of officer corps, diplomatic level.
Systematically teaching Azerbaijani children hatred of Armenians, nurse-feeding state-sponsored Armenophobia, and promotion of violence against all Armenians has been a national obsession under the two Aliyevs.
Azerbaijani Republic essentially over the past 30 years was built, and the identity of modern Azerbaijanis was built on hating Armenians. Aliyevs essentially succeeded in spreading hate and creating that dehumanizing image of Armenians. And that policy of saving face domestically also, unfortunately, allowed him to hold on to power. If you look, the wealthiest country in the South Caucasus is Azerbaijan. Just look at the hydrocarbon resources of that country. But data shows that the poorest nation per capita in this region is actually Azerbaijanis.
Preoccupying Azerbaijani people with a universal hatred and dehumanizing view of Armenians has served Aliyev well.
Azərbaycanlılar üçün sərhədin o tərəfində yalnız düşmən var. Başqa heç kim olmaz. Azərbaycan əskəri nişangaha baxanda və düşünəndə ki, qarşı tərəfdə də ana var, bacı var, tabut var, göz yaşı var, o öz əmrini yerinə yetirəməyəcək. O haqda düşünməməlidir.
Keeping his people distracted by a culture of Armenophobic obsessions and paranoia that rises almost to the level of national pastime, Aliyev has plundered Azerbaijani industries and natural resources, most notably oil and gas, treating them as his personal ATM. Meanwhile, as revealed by the Pandora Papers, hiding his ill-gotten fortune throughout the world, at the same time his people languish in poverty. Oil and gas flowing from Azerbaijan and the Caspian Sea, with the backing of fellow autocrat Erdogan of Turkey, Europe's and America's NATO ally, the Aliyevs enjoy an unlimited income. President Aliyev uses the money to build a very strong military. Aliyev's and Erdogan's shared Armenophobia, and the latter man's pan-Turkic ambition to geographically connect all Turkic nations in order to expand Turkey's power and essentially create a new Ottoman Empire, means Artsakh is not the only republic caught in the two dictators' crosshairs. Armenia itself stands in the way of their expansionist plan. So, Congressman, I just want to ask you first just a general question, your perspective on what happened in 2020 with the attack on Artsakh.
You always have to take these dictators' word when they say they're going to attack you, or they say they're going to resolve things through military means. You know, I think a lot of people say, well, do they really mean that? I usually take them on their word when they say they're going to do things bad. And, you know, basically all along, Aliyev has been saying that he intends to resolve the Artsakh situation through military means, and that's what he did.
Muhammed, Azerbaycan istiyor göstersin kendi uçur birdir, Hristiyan, Yahudi, sayda görüyor, ne düşünüyorsun?
Azərbaycan Cumhurbaşqanı Aliyev hər dəfasında tüm dünyaya bəyan ediyor ki, biz tüm dinlərə sayğı duyuyoruz. Məsələn, Hristiyanlara, Yahudilərə, Müslümanlara, Budistlərə. Amma ben düşünüyorum ki, bu dünyada imajını yüksəltmək üçün böyle bir konuşmadır. Bakarsanızsa Azərbaycanda az sayda Yahudi veya az sayda Hristiyan var. En çok Müslümanlardır. Ben düşünüyorum ki şimdilik Hristiyanlar Aliyev'e tehlike yapmadığı için Aliyev onlara karşı her hansısa bir baskı uygulamıyor. Herkes bilsin, Azerbaycan Cumhurbaşkanı veya Azerbaycan hükümeti hiçbir dine saygı duymuyor. Eğer kendi dinine bir adam saygı duymuyorsa, kendi insanını yalnız Aliyev'e karşı, Müslüman olarak Aliyev'e karşı olduğu için tutukluyorsa, onlara işkence veriyorsa, polis bölmelerinde onları ellerini kollarını bağlayarak, benim düşüncem budur. Ama böyle baktığında Aliyev ne Müslümanlara, ne Katoliklere, ne Yahudilere ne ya da Budistlere saygı duymuyor.
What has changed the last 30 years, mainly because of Turkey, Mr. Erdogan wants to become the leader in that region, a Muslim leader. And that's why nowadays we have this problem that the expansionism of Turkey in South Mediterranean and of course in Caucasus creates a problem because under a religious flag, now he can have a connection with Azerbaijan and a few other countries.
The problems with pan-Turkism. And the pan-Turkic movement has often been criticized as being reductionist, imperialistic, full of pseudoscientific theories, and even downright racist. And it is therefore no surprise that many pan-Turkic proponents during World War II were also Nazi sympathizers.
So how do you plan the perfect attack and get away with it? 1. Get a makeover. If you're a brutal dictator, that means strategize your genocidal assaults in advance and launch a methodical, aggressive international public relations campaign.
Former Facebook employee Sophie Zhang conducted a study and found out that fake accounts in Azerbaijan are controlled by the ruling YAP party. She said that thousands of comments are being written from these accounts in order to discredit rivals and direct public opinion.
Azerbaijan's caviar diplomacy went into overdrive as Aliyev prepared his attack on innocent civilians. In 2018, Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project, or OCCRP, reported that at the core of both his lobbying of Europe and the US is Ilkan Suleymanov, an Azerbaijani parliamentarian who Italian prosecutors say is responsible for implementing an aggressive plan to improve the country's image. Remember that name because I will mention it again. Cynically called Azerbaijan 2020 Smile Future, the plan was initiated in late 2011 by President Ilham Aliyev himself. Any doubt about just how deliberate are Aliyev's military assaults on the people of Artsakh dissolves when we consider his PR strategy title, Azerbaijan 2020. That is the year Azerbaijan attacked. Aliyev's Smile Future planning document is dated 2011. 2. Show them the money. Buy the silence and cooperation of politicians and international organizations. This is where the phrase Azerbaijani laundromat was coined. The Azerbaijani laundromat is a complex money laundering operation, a good old-fashioned slush fund that handled $2.9 billion over a 2-year period through 4 shell companies registered in the UK. Most of the money was used to cleverly pay off politicians, policymakers, and other key officials in Europe and the United States, Russia, and elsewhere. 3. Get pumped, prepare your military. Institute for War and Peace reported that Azerbaijan used its billions profited from oil to purchase sophisticated missiles, drones, and rocket artillery from several nations, including Turkey. The military-industrial complex happily obliged and sold them billions worth of weapons, knowing they would almost certainly be used against the Armenians. Senator Menendez, you've been a great champion for the Armenian-American community. You were responsible for co-authoring the Armenian Genocide Resolution Act, which passed the House and then the Senate. In fact, you went to the Senate floor and insisted that the Senate votes on it week after week until they did, and it passed unanimously. So thank you for that, first of all. But now I want to ask you about this genocidal attack and ethnic cleansing that was unleashed on the Armenians of Artsakh by Azerbaijan and Turkey, and see how you feel about it and your feedback.
Armenia doesn't have the same air force powers, it doesn't have the same military powers as those that are involved in the region, and between Russia and Turkey and even Azerbaijan has greater military resources. This is potentially an existential threat. And so no country that is otherwise peaceful should be in the midst of such an existential threat.
In the first 9 months of 2020, Azerbaijan's arms imported from Turkey's defense and aviation sector amounted to $123.26 million, making Azerbaijan one of the world's largest importers of weapons. In September, Azerbaijan bought more than $77 million worth of weapons. 4. Organize your crimes with a nod from the dawn. Make sure that you can count on the most powerful person in the world, the President of the United States, to look the other way. Aliyev and Erdogan made sure that the world's most powerful nation, the United States, would not intervene to stop the 2020 attack on Artsakh.
There's nothing that can be done by an administration that already was largely turned a blind eye to what was happening. There was a rocketing of arms sales under the Trump administration to Azerbaijan, and I believe in violation of the law because there is a provision that you could only sell to Azerbaijan if they weren't uprooting the balance and were peaceful in their process. Well, the Secretary of State, Pompeo, signed a series of waivers that attested to that, but we've seen that the Azerbaijanis did everything but be peaceful.
With Donald Trump in the White House, they had the perfect enabler. Trump, an unabashed admirer of President Erdogan, has prized business dealings in Turkey. Attempting to appease Erdogan, Trump tried to block the Senate from voting on the Armenian Genocide Resolution Act of 2019. He even invited Erdogan to the White House just before the vote. Businesses linked to the Turkish government are major patrons of the Trump Organization. Turkish officials have made 14 visits to the Trump properties, more than officials from any other country. In 2015, Trump said he had a little conflict of interest when it comes to Turkey. I have a little conflict of interest because I have a major building in Istanbul. It's a tremendously successful job. It's called Trump Towers. 2 towers instead of 1. Not the usual 1, it's 2. Turkish business dealings involving Trump are too many to list. In Azerbaijan, Trump has been building a Trump Tower with the Mammadov family, a group of individuals with a reputation for corruption.
It's a country called Azerbaijan, run by a dictator. Now they've got oil money. That's always a good combination. And it is starting to me to look like one of the best explanations we have had yet about why the White House is so dramatically freaked out about the prospect that there might be an independent investigation into this president and his foreign contacts. Before Ivanka Trump was showing off the Caspian Sea, the family she was there to do business with was featured in this article in Foreign Policy magazine. Look at the headline: "The Corleones of the Caspian." But under the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, you cannot go into business with the Corleones of the Caspian. You must, as an American business, do due diligence to make sure your financial partners in your international businesses are not paying bribes, are not outrageously corrupt, are not involved in huge repeated financial dealings with sanctioned international sponsors of terrorism. It is a violation of U.S. law to do business with, to make money from a business partnership like that.
5. Outsource it. Killer. Pay others to do your dirty work. Azerbaijanis and Turks feeling restless and angry about their country's economies, Aliyev and Erdogan didn't want to risk more outrage by using members of their own militaries for the attack. They employed mercenaries from Syria, Libya, and Pakistan to do the killing. These mercenaries were offered $2,000 a month with a $100 bonus for every Armenian beheaded.
We don't have mercenaries. This is our official statement.
De manière certaine, qui indique que des combattants syriens ont quitté le théâtre d'opération, des combattants de groupes djihadistes, en transitant par Gaziantep pour rejoindre ce théâtre d'opération du Haut-Karabakh.
Most of them couldn't pronounce Azerbaijan, couldn't point it out on a map. The extremism is sort of like overshadowed by the need for money.
And I understand Turkey recruited several thousand, I think, about, it said 4,000 or so Syrian jihadists to come and fight alongside the Azeris. So they were very well resourced in personnel and in weaponry.
6. Wait until no one's looking. Plan your attack when the world is most preoccupied. With the world consumed by COVID-19 and the US further preoccupied by its presidential election, fall 2020 was the perfect time to strike. Remember, the title of Azerbaijan's image-building campaign, Azerbaijan 2020 Smile Future. While the presidential election was foreseen, the added and unplanned distraction of a global pandemic only facilitated Azerbaijan's and Turkey's sleight of hand. How was this coordinated so well between Azerbaijan and Turkey in bringing mercenaries from Syria and Pakistan and Libya and all the drones and everything? What do you think that was, and how did it happen? Why last year, basically?
I think because the position of Ilham Aliyev and actually Erdogan as well were in a bad state before the COVID, and now using the COVID, they tried to drag the attention from the internal problems, economical and social, and corruption, everything. So now they won the war. So now, for most of Azerbaijanis, Ilham Aliyev is a lion. But Aliyev is a monster for me and you and all of us here. But for the Azerbaijani population, he's a lion. I hear everywhere and I read everywhere about extreme tolerance of Azerbaijanis.
Yeah, right.
Actually, I'm trying to believe, but you can't, because I experienced a lot of hatred against me as a Jew, for example, Jews. Let's leave aside Armenians, you know.
We know what that is like.
For example, one of the prosecutors, a general, this is a deputy prosecutor of Azerbaijan, he told me, look, sometimes we think that Adolf Hitler, he was right in his business. They told me, we just think we will burn you alive, like in Auschwitz.
Wow.
But what about Armenians? Much more.
I mean, people of Artsakh, had all the right to their self-determination.
Of course.
And to unleash pogroms on them in late 80s and 1990, and then declare war. You cannot coexist with someone who doesn't want you to exist.
A hail of shelling by Azerbaijan. They have been attacking Armenian positions. Scores of people, including civilians, have been killed.
Day one of the Azerbaijani offensive.
Just today, Azerbaijan started heavily attacking.
Air raid sirens and near constant bombardment.
We're being shelled in Stepanakert.
If you want to know what a war crime looks like, this is it.
Life for these ethnic Armenian residents has taken a violent turn.
Sunday, September 27th, Azerbaijan and Turkey unleash a genocidal assault with intent to ethnically cleanse Artsakh of its indigenous Armenian people. Aliyev's and Erdogan's hired troops, including merciless ISIS killers, Syrian, Libyan, and Pakistani jihadist mercenaries, released the monstrous firepower of humanity's latest, most sophisticated battlefield technology, including illegal and banned weapons.
Կյանքը լավ այլ է, ընտանիք եք մեծացրել, կյանք եք ստեղծել։ Հիմա ինձ ասեք, որ սեպտեմբեր 27-ին ես կռիվ չեմ ասում ջարդ, որտեղ կռիվ չէր։
Համամիտ եմ ձեզ հետ։
Ջարդի նման էր, որ սկսավ։ Ասեք, որ ինչ տեսակ, ձեզ ինչ է պատահավ ձեր ընտանիքին, ձեր տունը։
Ես սովորաբար երբ որ արթնանում եմ 6:30 մեր տանս շեմի մոտ միշտ աղոթում եմ, Աստծո շնորհակալություն եմ հայտնում, որ այսօր էլ օրը բացվեց խաղաղ բան։ Եվ այդ ընթացքում 7-ից 20 թե 15 պակաս ես ձայներ լսեցի կրակոցի։ Ոչ թե այսպես կրակում են, այնպես ճաճճուն էր լսվում։ Նայեցի երկնքին, մեկ էլ նայում եմ ու ասում եմ Կիրակի օր էր։ Նայում եմ, ասում եմ, ախա երկինքը պարզ է, էլի։ Ինչ ձայն պիտի լինի, մտքովս անգամ չի անցնում, որ նման բան պետք է լինի։ Հեռախոսը երբ որ զանգեց ներս մտա, վերցրեցի տղաս, ասեց մայրիկ ամեն դեպքում զգոն եղեք, պատերազմը։ Դու ամեն օր մահի ձայն ես լսում։
Բայց դա կռիվը չէ հասել ձեր քաղաքը, չէ՞։ Էրոպային, մենակ օտար տեղերը որ լսում եք։
Չէ, բայց չէ որ պայթեցնում են, դու քայլում ես, այստեղ ընկնում արդ։ Դրոնները մեր քաղաքում հենց առաջին օրվանից է հասել։ Հա, մեր քաղաքում հենց պայթեցնում են հենց առաջի օրը մեկի տանը մոտը, տանը չկպավ, ամբողջ ապակիները, բան, տենց բոլորը ասեն բաներն են։
Հատուկ ադրբեջանիները հատուկ հենց տուներին ու դպրոցներին, եկեղեցիներին ու հիվանդանոցներին։
Այո, որովհետև այնտեղ մենք ունեինք ջրամբար, որտեղից որ ջուրը մատակարարում էին բնակիչներին, իրենք հենց հարվածում էին այդտեղ թիրախները գիտեին։ Հենց այդտեղ էին հարվածում, ասենք այդ կամուրջը որ կա, որ դեպի Գորիս ես գնում, հենց այդտեղ էլի պայթեցրեցին, այդ պահին մեր հարևանի աղջիկը, իմ աղջիկը միասին գնացին, որ կոշիկներ բերեին զինվորների համար, ավտոմեքենայի մեջ հենց այդ ժամանակ պայթեց կամուրջը։ Իրենք անում են, թիրախավորում են այն տեղերը, որտեղ որ ասենք, որ դեպի դու գնում ես Հայաստան, որտեղից որ դու ջուր ես ստանում, որտեղից որ դու հոսանք ես, էլեկտրաէներգիայի այդ հեկի մոտ են պայթեցրել, իրենք լավ տեղերը գիտեին։
First of all, on September 27th, a UN member state unleashed a full-scale war against two democratic republics. Because of the use of force, which is one of the first things that UN Security Council did not condone. So I think what we have to constantly reiterate is that a UN member state unleashed a full-scale war for 44 days, targeting and shelling indiscriminately and deliberately civilian population and civilian infrastructure for the sole purpose of ethnic cleansing.
Մենք ստեղ ենք քնում երեխաները։
Դուք լրիվ ընտանիքով ստեղ եք քնում։
Այո։
Լրիվ ամեն ինչով խաղել ենք։ Այո։ Ընտանիքս վերադարձել է Հայաստան։ Սկիզբը սկսել է շերվա տենց 1-3-ի մոտ զինվորական եկան Գորիսից։ Ասցի միրո շուտ ընտանիքի դարձող Հայաստան արի։
Եկան ասեցին ստեղ ապասնի արդեն լայնամասշտաբ կռիվ լինելու, երեխաները մեղքեն տարեք։ Հա, ու տենց մենք թողեցինք եկանք այդ աթասները վռում էին, ընկերք մենք թողեցինք եկանք Հայաստան։ Մենք գույքը, հագուստը մեր մեքենան, երեխաներին պիժամայով ենք հանել դուրս։ Ոչ մի բան չենք վերցրել։ Ապրում ենք այս սենյակում, չգիտենք ոնց ապրենք, ոնց այս 4 երեխաներին պահենք։
Դու անցած տարի որ Ադրբեջանն ու Տաշկաստանը որ հարձակվան Արցախի վրա, դու արդեն զինվորություն ես անում։
Չէ, ժամանակ ես զինվորական ծառայություն 2018 թվականին եմ ավարտել։ Այո։ Կամավորագրվել ենք, գնացել ենք պատերազմ կամավորական հիմունքներով։
Դու ընտանիք ունես վստահեն։ Հա։ Կին կամ երեխա։
Նոր եմ ամուսնացել, մի քանի օր առաջ եմ ամուսնացել։
Շնորհավոր։
Մերսի շատ։ Դե հենց առաջի օրը որ գնացել ենք, արդեն տեսել ենք, որ թեժ մարտեր են ընթանում, որտեղ որ մենք ենք գնացել, մենք Ջաբրայել ենք եղել։ Այո։ Այդ ժամանակ արդեն Ջաբրայելը ադրբեջանցի գրավել էին, իրանց ձեռքներ, մենք գնացել ենք հետ վերցնելու, արդեն թեժ մարտեր են ընթանում, թե խփում էին, թե հրետաններ խփում, թե աթասներով էին հարվածում, մի խոսքով շատ թեժ էր էլի այդ հատվածում մարտերը, իջևեջե թեժ եղավ այդտեղ։
Դու այդ առաջի ժամանակներ օրերը քո միտքից ինչ է անցնում։
Ճիշտն ասած, այնտեղ տենց որ ասենք մտածում ենք հետ գալու կամ չգիտեմ ինչի մասին սուտ կլինի, այնտեղ միակ բանը որ մտածում ես, որ ինչքան հնարավոր շուտ կռիվը ավարտվի, որ շատ մարդիկ չզոհվեն, թե բանակից, զինվորությունից, թե խաղաղ բնակչությունից, որովհետև Ադրբեջանը լայնամասշտաբ հարձակում էր նաև քաղաքացիական ենթակառուցվածքների վրա, հիվանդանոցներին էին խփում, մանկապարտեզներին, դպրոցներին, բոլոր տեղերը, որտեղ կարող են հայ սպանել, իրենք խփում էին։
Turkey's role in importing mercenaries from Syria, terrorists, to join the mayhem, again demonstrated how incompatible Turkey's actions are with being a NATO ally.
Դու քանի տարեկան ես?
22։
Հայաստանի որ մասից ես?
Կոտայքի մարզից եմ, Զառ գյուղից եմ։ Ու տենց մանկուց հայրենասիրությունը դաստիարակվել է մեջս։ Հիմնականում հենց Ալ-Փաշա սարի վրա ենք եղել։ Մեր պահելու տարածքը, որ մենք պահում ենք այդ ժամանակ, պաշտպանում ենք այդ Ալ-Փաշա սարի բլուրներն են։ Ուղղակի հենց ստացվեց, որ չկարողացանք մինչև վերջ պահել, ինչ-ինչ տենց անհավասարության պատճառով, ուղղակի անհավասարության։
I will never unsee countless videos of Armenians brutally beheaded alive by Azerbaijani soldiers. It's difficult to understand how someone can gleefully inflict barbaric horrors on another human being. And how can others just stand around, cheer, and watch while a POW, a civilian, or even worse, an old man from the village be slaughtered like sheep and do nothing in 2020? And knowing that Azerbaijan and Turkey paid mercenaries $100 bonuses for every Armenian beheaded alive does not reduce the inhumanity.
It was just inexcusable and unnecessary for this whole conflict to have happened. But I'm thoroughly disgusted about the way that it happened. It's almost inconceivable to me that in the modern era that we would have this kind of warfare where people were cutting the ears off people as trophies and skinning them alive and doing things that you just wouldn't believe could be possible.
Քանի տարեկան ես?
21 եմ արդեն։
21 ես։
Այո։
21 տարեկանում արդեն շատ դժվար բաներ ես տեսել։ Որտեղից ես դու Հայաստանի?
Ես Կոտայքի մարզ գյուղ Քասախից եմ։
Այո։
Ծառայել եմ Հադրութի շրջանում։
Անցած տարի որ Ադրբեջանն ու Տաշկաստանը հարձակվան Արցախի վրա, դու արդեն զինվոր էիր։
Ես այդ ժամանակ զինվոր էի, այո, մնացել էր 100 օր, որ զորացրվեի 27-ին առավոտ լույս առավոտ ժամի 7-ին հարձակումը եղավ արդեն։ Հարձակվեցին մեծ մասշտաբով ու բոլոր կողմերին հարվածելով։ Իրանք հարվածում էին շատ մեծ հզոր զենքերով, ու հենց առաջի օրն էլ մենք դիրքերից իմացանք, որ բնակչությանն են հարվածել, մարդկանց տներին են խփել ու զոհվել էր, մարդիկ են զոհվել, մի կին էր զոհվել այդ ժամանակ։ Մինչև մեր հարազատներին կորցնելը, մինչև որ մենք մեր աչքերով ենք տեսնել արդեն, մենք ոգևորված ենք։ Մեծ կռիվ էր, շատ հզոր կռիվ էր։ Հավասար ուժեր չկար այդտեղ։ Հավասարությունը մենք ուժեղ ենք մեր դուխով, որ մենք առաջ ենք գնում, ոչ թե դուխով ենք գնում, այլ վախենալով, բայց գնում ենք առաջ։ Վախենալով գնում ենք առաջ, որովհետև վախենում ենք, որ մեկս մյուսին կկորցնի, կարող է թողնենք կան հարձակվեն, ու քանի որ իրանք հարվածում էին բնակելի տարածքներին, եթե մենք նահանջենք ու կռիվ չանենք, ավելի շատ զոհեր կտային մեզանից մեծահասակների, ընտանիքներին, երեխաներին։ Մենք կռվեցինք, այսպես ասած, կյանքի գնով։ Մենք ադրբեջանցիներ շատ քիչ ենք տեսել։ Ես անձամբ շատ քիչ եմ տեսել։
Ինչ է մտքիցդ անցնում այդ րոպեին, որ զգացի, որ այս կռիվը մենակ Ադրբեջանը չի։ Շատ օտար երկրներ են օգնում։
Գիտեք, մենք կռվում ենք կյանքի գնով։ Նույնիսկ որ հրադադարներ էին տալիս, մի քանի անգամ ստացվեց, էլի երկու անգամ հրադադար տվեցին, որ կռիվը դադարի։ Այդ ժամանակ մենք չենք խփել, բայց իրանք էլի խփել են, ավելի էր ուժեղանում կռիվը այդ ժամանակ։ Տալիս են հրադադար, բայց կռիվը ավելի էր ուժեղանում իրանց կողմից։ Իրանք ամեն տեսակի զենքերով հարձակվում են, իրանք դաժե նույնիսկ քիմիական զենքերով են հարվածել մեզ։ Ֆոսֆոր կոչվող զենքով։ Այո։ Շատ բան չգիտեմ այդ ֆոսֆորի, բայց ինքը լուսավորում է ու վառում է։ Այո։
Գյուղերում։
Այո, ես եղել եմ Մարտունու շրջան Կաղարծին գյուղում, այսպես էր էլի կոչվում, մենք Հադրութից հետո եկանք այդտեղ։ ու մեզ այդտեղից գիշերով տարհանեցին զորքին։ Ինչի համար, որովհետև այդ կողքի գյուղի այդ հատվածում ֆոսֆոր էին կրակել։ Ու ես տեսել եմ, թե ոնց էր անտառները վառվում, ամբողջ անտառները։
Ես Տավուշի մարզի Արծվաբերդ գյուղից եմ։ Այնտեղ դպրոցն ավարտելուց հետո ընդունվել եմ Վազգեն Սարգսյանի անվան ռազմական համալսարանը եւ 2017 թվականին ավարտելով այն ծառայության եմ անցել Արցախի հարավային զորամասերից մեկում։
Դու ամուսնացած ես եւ այդ երեխա ունես։
Այո, ես ամուսնացած եմ, ունեմ 1 տղա երեխա։ Առաջին իսկ օրվանից եղել եմ մարտադաշտում։
Այդ մոտ մի ամիսը դու ինչ տեսար։
Մոտ 1 ամսվա ընթացքում, ինչպես յուրաքանչյուրը, ես ինքս տեսել եմ եւ ընկերների կորուստ, եւ համաձայնագից ընկերների կորուստ, եւ որ ամենադաժանն էր նաեւ հայրենիքի կորուստ, իսկ իմ համար ամենադաժանը ես տեսել եմ նաեւ հարազատ եղբորս կորուստը, ով պատերազմի ընթացքում նույնպես զոհվել է։
Այո։ Եվ որ Ադրբեջանի արածը, Տաշկաստանի արածը եւ օտար mercenaries that were վարձային, որ հայերին ջարդին, ընդած մասին ինչ ես մտածում, իրենց արածի մասին։
Ես կարծում եմ, որ նախ եթե կոնկրետ մեր հակառակորդը այսօր Ադրբեջանն է, եթե ինքը վստահ լիներ, որ ինքը Իրանով, սենց ասած, Հայաստանին կարող է հաղթել, հաստատ կողքից վարձկաններ չէր վարձի, որպեսզի մեր դեմ կռվեին։ Երևի հենց վարձկաններ վարձելը նրա նշանն է, որ ինքը վստահ չի եղել, որ ինքը այնքան մարտունակ է, որ կարող է Հայաստանի Հանրապետության 18-ից 20 տարեկան զինվորների, զինծառայողների դեմ կռվել, դրա համար այլ ուժեր է ներգրավել, որպեսզի հասնի իր առջև դրված խնդրին։
The intention of the Azeri authorities was the ethnic cleansing of Artsakh. It's very clear. The intention was to clear that territory of its indigenous Armenian population.
When they've captured a prisoner, they would take his phone and then they would carry out atrocities and maybe even killing, and then video that on the phone and send it back to his family. I was speaking to a lady in Armenia and she lost her husband. She said, I just dare not look at my phone. And those are appalling crimes against humanity.
It's impossible to convey the feeling one has looking at thousands of graves of men, no, boys, most of them between the ages of 18 and 21, with their pictures next to their graves. Then you watch devastated families come to visit the graves. Shattered, wailing, and inconsolable. 5,000 people massacred in 44 days. Thousands more injured, and families that will never be the same.
We really felt this shock, and because we're always living with the specter of what happened and the genocide, and for a few hours it was like all these feelings came back up, and we're really afraid that it was starting again. I think it brought back things.
Ես վիրավորվել եմ անցած տարի հոկտեմբերի 11-ին ու արդեն այդ ժամանակվանից գտնվել եմ հիվանդանոցում։
Ինչպես վիրավորվար։
Վիրավորվել եղավ Էլի Ջաբրայելի զորամասի մոտ սարկայից, սարի բարձունքին եղավ, վիրավորվել ենք ԱԹՍ-ից, անօթաչո թռչող սարքից, բայց միջև էդ էլ անընդհատ հարվածներ ենք ստանում, ուղղակի այդ հարվածից վիրավորվեցինք էլի։
Դու ինչպես վիրավորվար։
Անօթաչո թռչող սարք։ Իրանք տենց շատ էին, էլի, շատ էին։ Ու բացի հրետանին, որ խփում էր, կամիկաձեն նենց ստացվեց, որ խփեց մեզ։ Այդ ժամանակ ստացանք մի քանի հոգի ընկերներով ստացանք վիրավորումներ։ Փառք Աստծո, ոչ մեկի կյանքին վտանգ չի սպառնում, մինչև հիմա էլ բոլորը ողջ են, բայց ստացան մարմնական լուրջ վիրավորումներ, ամպուտացիաներ, բայց կարևորը սաղ մնացինք։
Յոքո ձեռքը դա սարքից տվա, չէ՞։
Հա, հենց այդ ժամանակ մի անգամից կտրվեց ձեռքս, բայց բերել էի հետս։ Ու ճանապարհին հումոր էինք անում, հասանք տեղ, բժիշկը ասում է, որ սառույցի մեջ դրած բերեր կփրկենք, ասում են բժիշկ ջուրը ներ կխմենք, ինչ սառույց, 4 ժամ անցել է վիրավորումից հետո մինչև հասել ենք Իշխանաձոր, երբ որ պրոթեզարան գնացինք ու իմացանք, որ մոտավոր մի 150 հոգի տղերք են, որ ձեռք ոտք կտրվել է, ընկերս պտտվեց, ասեց, դենց 150-ից մեկը դու պետք է լինեիր, ու այդ ժամանակ պատասխանեց իրան, ասեցի, կարայի 6000-ից մեկը ես լինեի, կամ են գերիներից մեկը, որ իմ համար ավելի լավ է մեռած լինեմ, քան գերի։
Congresswoman Lee, what actions has Congress taken or is going to be taking to hold Azerbaijan and Turkey accountable for their actions?
I've been just horrified by recent violent assaults that the Azerbaijani forces have perpetrated in 2020. And there's got to be a negotiated solution. The U.S. Must stand firmly against such aggression and support efforts to bolster these negotiations.
From what it seems to me, with the sort of genocidal intent that they orchestrated this attack, the sort of trying to ethnically cleanse Artsakh of Armenians and the cultural genocide and what's still happening, and having read the UN's definition of genocide, wondering if this to you seems like a genocidal act or genocide to begin with.
If you just, stack it up and look at the last 100 years since the genocide, you have to ask the question, why is Turkey so intent on attacking Armenia or working with Azerbaijan to attack Armenia or Karabakh? And then they don't stop even there, they keep demanding more. And the maximalist claim is that the president of Azerbaijan claims that, Armenia is a part of historic Azerbaijan, which is just ridiculous. But when you make that kind of rhetoric and you're convincing your own people to prepare for war and to go to war, I can only think that for the government of Azerbaijan and Turkey, that it was intentional. It's just one plan, part of the Pan-Turkist plan, the Pan-Turkism, which was one of the causes of the genocide. I don't see anything other than a goal of eliminating all Armenians from Armenia and Karabakh.
Wow, that's pretty clear. So would you essentially say this is genocide? This was just another attempt at a genocide?
I'd have to say it was.
It's said that denial is the last act of a genocide. Armenians have lived with the tragic legacy of genocide for 107 years and have worked to honor the memory of the victims, only to be confronted by another existential threat. Immediately after the 2020 attack on Artsakh, witnessing the inaction of the international community, many Armenian activists took to social media to bring attention to what was happening and combat Azerbaijan's disinformation campaign. It wasn't until I went to Armenia and saw the destruction and its effect on the people that I realized the magnitude of the pain and suffering. It's agonizing to see the trauma of thousands of people whose misery was preventable. My love for my embattled motherland, Armenia, was instilled in me by my parents. We visited Armenia when I was 3 years old. Remarkably, I still have little bits of memory from our 3-month trip. I remember visiting different towns, the welcome reception that we would receive, and the warm hospitality of the people. And this is despite them living during Soviet times. For me, not having been born in Armenia made me feel even closer to my motherland. When you're part of a minority, wherever you live, you hold on to your roots tightly. I also realized that I had a responsibility to be an advocate for myself and other marginalized people who are oppressed for various reasons. As a gay man, I have experienced prejudice, discrimination, and hate. Fear and hatred of others are wicked ingredients to which all human beings share an allergy. It's a fatal allergy whose end state symptom is death, and sometimes mass murder. Azerbaijan's institutionalized rhetoric of Armenophobia is dangerous, to say the least. I know what phobias can develop into and how they can cause immeasurable damage. As a journalist who is also an activist, I've received my share of hate messages and threats of violence. But none have been as vile and threatening as those from various Azerbaijani and Turkish people. One threatened me on Twitter with a direct message that read, "We know your position and place. Consider your own security." Sometimes people notify me when they see that a call to action has been made against me, while others would simply spew hatred. Then there was this one Azerbaijani who tweeted my information and wrote, "Dove is a radio host from the USA. Rare asshole." In Azerbaijan, dove is a derogatory word for gay men, such as faggot. This wasn't the first time I'd been called a homophobic slur, and it certainly won't be the last. But I'd never been called a rare asshole or a dove. What an honor. I continue to receive threats from some Azerbaijani and Turkish people, but they don't deter me. I think about 5,000 people, mostly between the ages of 18 and 21, who lost their lives and their families. Now, we say 5,000 people, but each of them had a life, a story, a family, many who loved them, dreams and aspirations. 2 states left in devastation, mourning the loss of life, land, and life's work, and under constant threat of another invasion. It's not about me, but it's personal. The assault on Artsakh erratically registers as merely an intermittent blip on the international community's radar. With few exceptions, scarce media coverage of Azerbaijani and Turkish aggression against the republics of Artsakh and Armenia are characterized by half-hearted research, apathy, and indifference, which sometimes reads more like contempt for the story than objectivity.
I am deeply concerned the relative silence by countries in the world who should be rising up, at least with their voices, against what is happening in Artsakh. I also think that it is disgracefully neglectful that the United States did not engage in trying to end the conflict early, and that lack of engagement was filled by Russia and Turkey.
Were you surprised at the relative silence of the international community?
No, I was not surprised. I understand the cynicism of foreign politics and diplomacy. There are many organizations, OSCE, UN, Minsk Group, the Security Council, United Nations Security Council. At the end of the day, they're composed of countries, all of whom are motivated by self-interest. Countries with large natural resources have that. That in of itself represents a value, and other countries, because of their self-interest, will act upon it. Armenia doesn't have those natural resources.
Lack of interest and shrugging off Armenians in both republics is a posture not exclusive to the international media. It's also a feature of many of the world's best-known NGOs, philanthropy groups, and human rights organizations. On September 27, 2020, scores of Armenian civil society organizations penned a public appeal to the international community condemning aggression by the Azerbaijani regime. They asked international bodies and human rights organizations to act decisively and respond substantively to the genocidal assault against the people of Artsakh. Writing again on September 30th, they expressed righteous anger to the silence that followed. Challenging the professed neutrality proclaimed by an array of international actors, still reeling Artsakh's leaders found their faith misplaced in a world that would care about Aliyev's and Erdogan's violent effort to ethnically cleanse their land of a people who've called it home for millennia. Global medias, national and international governments, and many NGOs' positioning and messaging around the nebulous concept of neutrality has told a profoundly vulnerable population to stop defending itself. Crumbs of responses have merely expressed concern. Meanwhile, they focus artificially neutral rhetoric of both sides onto a deadly tragedy that presents clear moral opposites of right and wrong, good versus evil, and innocent versus guilty.
Well, let me tell you, Mr. President Aliyev, what our own BBC colleagues have seen. They witnessed random shelling of the town, including at an emergency services centre, an apartment block destroyed. As people tried to flee, there was a drone overhead. Now, this is not hearsay. This was witnessed and filmed by the BBC. They were there, President Aliyev.
So what they were there?
There is evidence that you have used cluster munitions in civilian areas in the streets of Stepanakert.
We are not using them. This is another fake news. It is Armenia who uses cluster bombs.
So everything is fake news?
Of course.
Most statements issued so far by international organizations, especially those that regularly deal with human rights violations, are glaringly devoid of the usual human rights language one expects in cases like the September 2020 attacks on Artsakh by Turkish-empowered Azerbaijani forces. Instead, these statements read like watered-down, politically correct essays meant to illustrate a sophomoric grasp of balance and neutrality. They tend not to record, state, or condemn the human rights violations, the violations of international humanitarian law, and the violations of the human rights of the people affected by ruthless Azerbaijani bombardments. Is the international community telling us that people living in non-recognized states are not entitled to human rights? It sure seems that way. Sometimes referred to as the Azerbaijani laundromat, a complex web of money laundering operations, acts as a slush fund that handled $2.9 billion over a 2-year period through 4 shell companies registered in the UK. Its sole purpose is to bribe politicians worldwide on behalf of the Azerbaijani government. Remember the man Süleymanov that I mentioned earlier? Well, he runs a pro-regime organization in Baku, Azerbaijan's gleaming capital built on oil money and corruption. A presidentially appointed purview makes Süleymanov Azerbaijan's de facto publicist general. According to Open Secrets, he has spent hundreds of thousands of dollars per year for several years on lobbying officials who shape America's foreign policy. But because there's no formal connection between Süleymanov or anyone else in the Azerbaijani government, the scheme allows the US lobbying firms it employs to avoid disclosing any such relationships, disclosures of which would otherwise be required under the Foreign Agents Registration Act, as is required of persons representing the interests of foreign governments in the US. From 2012 to 2014, even as the Azerbaijani government arrested activists and journalists wholesale, members of the country's ruling elite were using a secret slush fund to pay off European politicians.
Mr. Javansir Feiziev, the co-chair of the European Parliament's delegation with Azerbaijan, on the 31st of January 2022 has found overwhelming evidence that he was channeling 5.6 million pounds to different shell companies from bank accounts from Estonia and Latvia. And these companies were entirely fictitious according to the National Crime Agency, and they were there to mask money laundering. So, colleagues, I think now we have a little bit of an idea how the laundromat of Azerbaijan functions.
Although many more politicians were implicated, Council of Europe eventually expelled 14 in Azerbaijan bribe case. The scheme was uncovered through a joint investigation by several nations and organizations. That rare accountability came in part thanks to the efforts of Global Anti-Corruption Consortium, a collaboration started by OCCRP, which became famous in 2016 for its release of the Panama Papers under the auspices of the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists and Transparency International. The Council of Europe is an international organization founded in the wake of World War II to uphold human rights, democracy, and the rule of law in Europe. Sadly, many European states show little interest in the institution. Yet Azerbaijan has expended a lot of effort trying to prevent the Council of Europe from condemning its human rights record. For years, there have been indications that it isn't just lobbying that has played a role in remolding a seemingly kinder and gentler image of Baku. Rather, it appears sometimes called caviar diplomacy has been at play. ESI Chairman Gerald Knauss said, "If an MP can wire hundreds of thousands of euros without there being an independent investigation, then the Council of Europe is just a bazaar." Some of the 2.9 billion that passed through the Azerbaijani laundromat secret slush fund between 2012 and 2014 ended up in the hands of a purportedly private Azerbaijani organization that hired Virginia-based lobbying firms to advocate within the US government's halls of power for more than a decade. In May 2018, OCCRP revealed that the Azerbaijani laundromat also financed lobbying and reputation laundering in the US. In July 2018, Transparency International filed a request to the US Department of Justice to open investigations into potential violations of the Foreign Agents Registration Act. The Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, or OSCE, is the world's largest security-oriented intergovernmental organization. Its mandate includes issues such as arms control, promotion of human rights, freedom of the press, and fair elections. The OSCE created the Minsk Group to settle the issue of Artsakh in a peaceful and collaborative manner. The Minsk Group is made up of the United States, Russia, and France. However, Azerbaijan rejected several peace proposals made by the Minsk Group through the years. Part of the reason for Azerbaijan's obstruction was that OSCE was mired in endless discussions based on false equivalency of both-sidism to address the dispute, rather than examining the facts and condemning Azerbaijan for its flagrant aggression. The second unprovoked attack against Artsakh caused not only a political, socioeconomic, and humanitarian crisis, but also changed the perception among most of the people in Armenia about the international community, democracy, and human rights. As members of the international community and as important regional players, there's frustration among the people of Armenia and Artsakh with regard to EU's anemic reaction to Azerbaijani and Turkish atrocities. Armenians in both republics expected that the EU would stand up for its values and honor its commitments to foster peace and security while developing and consolidating democracy in South Caucasus region and also protecting human rights. But in the end, political and economic interests seem to have prioritized above all principles. That has profoundly undermined EU's core values and its role in the region.
I'm glad that the President could confirm today that the country is a committed partner and will continue to provide the EU market with significant volumes of energy supply.
The EU's response to the direct involvement of Turkey and its Syrian mercenaries who attacked Artsakh in September 2020 has not adequately reflected the values and principles underlying its stated foreign policy. Threats against Greece and Cyprus and other EU member states made by Turkey, a regional power with strong economic and military links to Europe and the US, are undoubtedly at play as Europe's mumbling and bumbling responses to Azerbaijan's and Turkey's genocidal assault. Moreover, the tough rhetoric and outright blackmailing of Europe, as perpetrated by Erdogan's government regarding possible refugee waves being unleashed on Europe, continues to prevent some EU countries from speaking up against the destructive foreign policy that Erdogan's government imposes on the region. Meanwhile, Europe fails to impose sufficient sanctions against Turkey.
Europe has paid Turkey billions
to look after 3.6 million Syrian refugees. Now, President Erdogan is actually threatening to release them into Europe. I mean, you know, is this the act of a NATO ally?
Congresswoman Spear, what do we do as the public, your constituents, to get the attention of the people in charge? As a journalist, I've certainly tried, but it's difficult to get the attention of the officials. During the 44 days when Armenians were being slaughtered by Azerbaijan and Turkey and the mercenaries, there wasn't much movement from the United Nations, European Union, Council of Europe, OSCE, and such.
The Azeris and the Turks took full advantage of the vacuum that exists in the United States right now and realized that if they didn't act now, it would become a very different result in a matter of 70 days.
I was very hopeful when President Biden came, and of course he recognized genocide after 160 years, but then a week later, Section 907 was lifted, and this, this massive military aid was given to Azerbaijan. What, with people like yourself and other members of Congress, Senator Menendez and Congressman Schiff and Congresswoman Spear and such, and many others, what is happening, or I should say, what isn't happening? Is there like a blockade to the State Department or the White House?
You know, the State Department takes this position, which I reject, that this was not military assistance. Because we had always had an agreement that any military assistance, be it training or whatever, had to be on a parity basis between Armenia and Azerbaijan. And they took a position this was for customs, inspection, drug interdiction from the borders in Iran through the Caspian Sea. To me, that was all nonsense. But I think they really believed it. I mean, Vic, maybe they're just naive. I don't know what the word is. But they really believe that this had nothing to do with the war. Now, I do think that some of that could have been used in the war, right? But beyond that, it sent a very bad signal that we were going to send all this assistance to Azerbaijan. So we're trying, I hate to say we're educating the State Department, but in a fashion it is, right? It's like, you can't make these mistakes. Yeah, you can't make these mistakes. You can't buy into this notion that you're going to help Azerbaijan and it's going to be used for peaceful means. That's just not true, right?
Erstwhile hero NGO of oppressed people around the world, Human Rights Watch, has so far offered, at best, only lukewarm support for Azerbaijan's and Turkey's targets in Armenia and Artsakh. Human Rights Watch is another group that's proven highly susceptible to the lure of both-sidism. Like Human Rights Watch, Amnesty has likewise been lukewarm and subject to trap of meaningless and harmful both-sidism. At the same time, the United Nations is either absent or engaged in both-sidism. Similarly, the Collective Security Treaty Organization, a regional peace-seeking collective established in the immediate post-Soviet era, has made clear it also wants nothing to do with holding to account Baku for its genocidal assault on Artsakh. Despite all of the subterfuge and confusion that's been fabricated by disinformation forces emanating out of Baku, Russia, the US government, and France all agree that mercenaries fighting on the side of Azerbaijan and Azerbaijan troops started the war. But when I say war, please understand that I'm using quotation marks around that three-letter word. Why? Because it's not accurate to call an elementally lopsided genocidal assault on civilians a war just because some young men tried to defend their community and their country against the attack. While most of the European response to the crisis has been weak at best, there are some bright spots, modest as they are, including the governments of France, the Netherlands, Greece, and Luxembourg. Russia's role is different. It's not so cut and dried. Three nations tried to broker a ceasefire following the attack: France, the US, and Russia. Russia finally succeeded. For its part, Armenia is strategically stuck between a rock and a hard place. Russia's President Putin plays all three sides. He's made sure that whatever happens, it maximizes the benefits for Russia, which managed to finally settle in the South Caucasus. It enabled Russia to expand its influence in the region, monitored the flow of fossil fuel and water in the area, and have presence by the Iranian border.
This was part of the long-term plan, probably 5-10 years even, that Azerbaijan was going to obtain the most modern weapons to work with Turkey. And I think in a sense they must have also made Russia understand that this was going to happen, and that Russia, was going to stop it or not, but that they were going to go ahead.
It sounds like you think that on some level Russia had an awareness of this would happen at some point.
I don't think a war like this could have just erupted without, in some way, the United States, even Russia, knowing what was going to happen. And I say that because Russia was unhappy with Armenia in many ways. And I think this could have been one way that Russia was to sort of emphasize that they do have, I'm going to use the word control, but they do have a great deal of influence over Armenia.
In terms of Europe's inaction, I think France tried to play a leadership role.
Quite quickly, the French president reacted to the news, and he invited us and other Armenian organizations in Paris. So we were able, and Christina also, we were able to send aid very quickly.
As President Macron supports the cause, the French government given our disposition 5 airplanes and 3 cargo.
Then there are exceptional leaders who are not afraid to go against the grain, take a stand for what's right, and genuinely try to help. France's President Macron was the only head of state that unreservedly declared his support for the people of Artsakh. Unlike many others, he did not succumb to politics of respectability by spewing the usual nonsensical both-sidism, because he could tell the difference between right and wrong. In fact, President Macron even offered French troops for peacekeeping purposes.
I want to quote specifically French President Emmanuel Macron, who said, in reference to NATO, and I quote, "NATO is brain dead."
He said, "What we are currently experiencing is the brain death of NATO. And you have no coordination whatsoever of strategic decision-making between the United States and its NATO allies."
Is it because of Azerbaijan's oil, do you think, and money and all of that that's really tilting the level, the powers here?
Well, it's certainly a major factor with the UK government. Way back in the previous war in the 1990s, I brought back photographs of children shredded by cluster bombs. And I took these to a very senior person in the Foreign Office. I don't say who because it's an unofficial briefing. But I showed these photographs and I said, will the British government make representation of the government of Azerbaijan to stop dropping cluster bombs on civilians? It's against international law. The reply? No country has an interest in other countries, only interests. We have oil interests in Azerbaijan. Good morning. And I said, I'm ashamed to be British.
Both-sidism is a form of false equivalency that has abetted war crimes and stopped peace from taking hold. How does a nation like Azerbaijan, where there is no press freedom, and Turkey, which has more journalists in prison than any other country in the world, manage to successfully shape a false international media narrative denying the genocidal assault against the people of Artsakh? Young Armenian Americans have taken to blocking freeways in Los Angeles and also protesting in front of the offices of CNN. Their aim? To draw attention to the deadly harm of false equivalency reporting, also known as both-sidism. But CNN is not alone in its slavish adherence to a supposedly objective position. A March 18, 2021 Wall Street Journal article goes to great pains trying to show both sides of a one-sided attack and its aftermath. Ironically, that very same article, if read with even the slightest hint of critical thinking, reveals that there is no equal sides point of view to be legitimately observed. How so? Because one so-called side of Azerbaijan's attack on Artsakh is the attacker, Azerbaijan. the fate of possibly hundreds of Armenian soldiers who Armenian and international human rights activists say are being held as prisoners of war by Azerbaijan remains one of the most polarizing issues in the aftermath of the conflict, the article says. Huh? Polarizing? Well, I guess there's polarizing disagreement about such behavior between opponents of ethnic cleansing versus those who support such crimes. Holding onto prisoners of war, more accurately described as hostages or kidnapping victims, after signing a ceasefire agreement is objectively wrong. It's okay to report that, Wall Street Journal. Adding insult to injury, the newspaper goes on to voice Baku's lies and propaganda. Witness both sidism strengthening a predatory dictator's hand against some of the world's most vulnerable people. Azerbaijan denies holding any prisoners of war, the Wall Street Journal continues. President Ilham Aliyev has said that his country returned all legitimate prisoners of war and other captives. He said those still being held are terrorists and saboteurs. Who needs such meandering, meaningless, and objectively wrong-headed zombie journalism? Who wants reporters to march blindly into a neutrality la-la land? But the greatest disappointment for the survivors of Aliyev's and Erdogan's genocidal assault are so-called progressives who remain silent. I'm talking about individuals who profess liberal values and who never miss an opportunity to speak out against injustices elsewhere. Progressives rightly call out neo-imperialistic and neo-colonial policies of European countries as well as the US and Russia. Yet many of those same voices are glaringly absent and strangely silent while Turkey, as an ally of Azerbaijan and direct party to the ethnic cleansing in Artsakh, execute genocidal attacks. Where are the outcries and where is the outrage within progressive circles in regards to Turkey's aggressive pursuit of neo-imperialistic, neo-Ottoman expansion in the South Caucasus? The lack of concern and absence of solidarity demonstrated by international colleagues and partners has led many Armenians to feel isolated and alone. Fend for yourselves. That deafening message the pen of silence writes on the hearts and minds of Armenians and the Armenian people of Artsakh when progressives remain silent. Similarly, when media represents the perspectives of both sides in reporting about genocidal military attacks, it's akin to saying to the targets, maybe you shouldn't defend yourself. Putting it in simple terms, when you arrive at the home of a couple where the husband is a wife beater and the woman of the house is a battered wife with a black eye, you don't say, I want both of you to put your fists down, or I'm sure there are two sides to this story. So why do some organizations and media outlets feel the need to assume ludicrous positions with regard to the victims of Azerbaijani and Turkish assaults?
Azerbaijan is engaged in not only warfare on the battlefield, but in a cyber war. And Azerbaijan for years has been engaged in rewriting history, claiming cultural and historic figures that were, for example, Iranian, claiming that those are Azeri. And the name of the state is actually borrowed from Iran, from Persia. Right. Aliyev had systematically engaged in hunting down and killing his critiques outside of Azerbaijan. The famous case of Alexander Lapshin, the Israeli-Russian blogger.
Blogger Alexander Lapshin was extradited to Azerbaijan from Belarus. Lapshin got into trouble with Azerbaijan when he blogged about Karabakh. In it, he criticizes the Azerbaijani government and media, and then the army.
After about 2-3 months, I felt I'm going crazy. Actually, what's going on with Azerbaijani jail? They used non-Muslims they used them like for sexual slavery within the jail. So some ethnical Russians sit in a jail for just simple things. Right. So they work in the kitchen, they cleaning and everything. And the third job as sexual slavery in Azerbaijan. So if you are not Muslim, so you're in danger. They asked me, did they fuck already? I said, no. Oh, you're lucky one.
Meanwhile, Azerbaijan ramped up its public relations campaign, employing not one, but 6 of K Street's heavy-hitting firms, including the Livingston Group, Stellar J Communications, BGR, the Podesta Group, and DLA Piper. In just 1 year, the country spent $1.3 million on lobbying. While some of these firms have since distanced themselves from Azerbaijan, the damage has been done. In an article in Medium, journalist Casey Michel wrote that in the past 2 years, there have been a flurry of analysis on Azerbaijan's moves to whitewash its dictatorial image for American audiences. Slathered in hydrocarbon profits, the autocratic government of Ilham Aliyev has unleashed spin doctors, duped reporters, and led one of the most brazen pushes to abuse American lobbying loopholes of any foreign government. All of this while Azerbaijan's first family has taken rank advantage of offshore avenues and shell corporations to bilk unknowing taxpayers. The primary phenomenon that has seen certain cursory coverage deals with lobbyists on Azerbaijan's dole penning op-eds on Baku's greatness, on its stability, on its secularism, on its propensity to provide energy security to a West scouring for non-Russian fuel sources. To be sure, there is on its face nothing of necessity wrong with lobbyists pushing op-eds. This remains their prerogative as long as they can find an acquiescent editor. However, those lobbying on Azerbaijan's behalf and those with ties to Baku's state energy firm, SOCAR, have built up an impressive track record not simply for pushing their essays on Azerbaijan's appeal. Rather, they've done so without any requisite reveal of their ties to Azerbaijan. Instead of disclosing their financial interests in enhancing Azerbaijan's reputation, they've misled editors and readers alike, posing as disinterested observers instead of those paid to whitewash a country whose civil rights record places it at the bottom of the list of nations.
In terms of the propaganda, that's unceasing. That's not stopped in any way. They bribe people, they put out propaganda, they put out what on the face of it seems ridiculous, but yet this is the way history is written. History is written by those who have money and can influence. And so that's what they are doing with their money.
On November 9, 2020, after 44 days of being under siege, Armenia was forced to sign a so-called ceasefire with Azerbaijan, brokered by Russia. Since, Azerbaijan has repeatedly broken the ceasefire, killed more people, and even occupied parts of Armenia proper.
Many of us in Congress, through successive administrations, urged our State Department to forcefully push back, to call out Azerbaijan for its belligerence and its provocative acts. So my first sentiment about the whole thing is just how tragically preventable it was, and then the horrific loss of life. More immediately, we still need to continue the pressure to return these prisoners of war, to end these sham prosecutions, and make sure that these young people are returned to their families. So that trauma continues. Just the idea that we would be providing any kind of military support to a nation that just made unprovoked war against its neighbor, I think is wrong. But the United States is really indispensable. And when we lead, we have the capacity to inspire others to act with us.
You know, right now they're using these prisoners of war, who I think at this point are hostages, to really make deals.
They really are hostages. I think that's exactly the right word for it.
Congresswoman Porter, there was an outreach by many members of Congress, including yourself, to the previous administration to do something about the actions of Azerbaijan and Turkey. And the same outreach is being done now with the current administration to perhaps implement some sanctions against these two nations and what they did to Artsakh and continue to do with even Armenia. What are your feelings about that?
Yeah, I have a really important sense here that it's important that we're leaders in human rights. For too long, the Trump administration would actually create some of these problems and stir some of these things up. So I think we need to be talking about sanctions on Turkey if they're going to continue to engage in these kinds of abuses.
Այն որ պատերազմից առաջ օրինակ ունեի նպատակներ, պլաններ, ու որ գծում էի մի տարի, 2 տարի, 5 տարի հետո ինչ պետք է լինի, ես հիմա ընդհանրապես չեմ նայում դաժե վաղվան։ Ես մենակ նայում եմ այսօր ինչ կարա լինի, որովհետև ես տեսել եմ ոնց կարա մարդ լինի ու ակնթարթորեն չլինի։
Edmund's interview was one of the most moving on my first visit to Armenia to make the film. At 21 years old, he had lost his arm and seen unimaginable horrors. Despite his admirable effort to be strong and use humor to cope, his spirit had taken a toll. So when I went back to Armenia a few months later, I wanted to follow up and talk to him again.
Պատերազմից հետո մենք լիքը էլի զոհեր ու վիրավորներ ենք ունեցել, արդեն 44 օրյա պատերազմի ավարտից հետո։ Ու արդեն ունեցել ենք ոչ թե Արցախի տարածքում, այլ ունեցել ենք Հայաստանի Հանրապետության տարածքում։ Հեռացավ մի տարին մեր վիրավորման։ Կարևորը կարողանում եմ աշխատել, կարողանում եմ սովորել թե համալսարանում եմ սովորում ու թե առանձին արվեստի դպրոցում դերասանության, ու այդ ամեն ինչը կարողանում եմ անել այս բուժումներ ստանալու հետ համատեղ ու աշխատելու հետ։
Ցավի համար ինչ ես անում։
Ոչ մի բան, սովորել եմ հետը, տենց յոլա եմ գնում։
Ճար։
Չեմ օգտագործում։
Not even school children are safe from the whims of a powerful but insecure dictator's ground troops. When one of Azerbaijani President Aliyev's soldiers stopped a school bus transporting Armenian teens, terror struck. The vulnerable youngsters watched as a painted emblem on their bus bearing the flag of Artsakh was violently scratched off the vehicle with a knife. As the knife blade flashed reflections of sunlight into their eyes, the young minds of the Armenian boys and girls had imprinted onto their psyches the meaning of oppression, violent intimidation, and cultural erasure.
I think Armenia is immensely vulnerable.
Yeah.
And Azerbaijan and Turkey know it's very vulnerable. And unless the international community gets its act together to ensure that Azerbaijan does not get away with impunity, I'm afraid they will continue. And
Yes.
It's not impossible that there might be another Armenian genocide on the horizon.
For the first time in a very long time, the Armenian people spoke and they created democracy in Armenia, and we should be embracing them and promoting them. Azerbaijan and Turkey have become more autocratic. So for all the talk about wanting to create democratic governments around the world, we certainly weren't promoting Armenia during a time when it really needed our support.
No territory outside of the Republic of Armenia that's either under control of Turkey or Azerbaijan, territories where indigenous Armenians have resided for thousands of years, that today have an Armenian population. The fact is, anything that goes under their control, the indigenous people, who are the Armenians, are either killed or expelled. They have proven through their actions that they don't want Armenian people to exist. Turkey has a goal of creating a land connection to Azerbaijan, and that's what this is about. But as experience has shown, again, the international community today is in such disarray, and there's such a disengagement by some of the major players, for example, the United States or the European Union, where aggressive states can act at will and get away with it.
Փաստն է, որ մենք չունենք Արցախի մի մասը։
Այո։
Եվ հիմա էլ վտանգ է սպառնում Հայաստանի որոշ մարզերի։ Մեր մի երիտասարդություն կորցրեցինք մենք։ 18-ից 20 տարեկան սերունդների մեծ մասը ցավոք սրտի զոհվել է։
You are a big educator and an advocate for Holocaust studies, Armenian genocide studies. What is your general perspective on what happened?
It's hard being Jewish and watching that, because
I mean, we all say never again, but it doesn't mean just never again for the Jews. We don't want to see a genocide happen, and especially an attempt to repeat a genocide that was so difficult to get recognized and has never been recognized by the perpetrators. The thing that makes me the most distressed is I feel a kinship with the Armenian community, especially as a Jew, and the fact that we went through the two great Holocausts in world history.
Do you recognize the independent of Artsakh as a council member?
Oh, of course. Okay. And I believe that that's true of every member of our city council.
The cowardice of our so-called leaders who refuse to stand up for the truth and call the spade a spade continues to fan flames. Secretary Blinken routinely sidesteps the facts, deflects his responsibility, and draws false equivalents when talking about Azerbaijan and Turkey's actions.
It's important for the United States to continue to say, look, we're here. We want to use the Minsk group. We want the prisoners of war returned. Make the point that this needs to be resolved diplomatically. But keeping in mind all the time that we take the position that Artsakh has, and the people there have a right to self-determination, and they have a right to determine their own fate as Armenians. I mean, we're never going to get away from that.
Կրվի ժամանակ քո մարմինդ վիրավորվել է ոչ մտա։
Չէ։ Ես չեմ վիրավորվել։
Միտքդ ինչպես։
Դե տղաներին, որ տեսել եմ իմ կողքին ընկած, իմ ընկերներին, դրանից հետո միշտ այդ հիշողությունները կա էլի։
Բացատրի։
Ցավը այդ ամեն ինչը։
Ինչ ես տեսել։
Մահ, վիրավորներ, ընկած տղեկին ձեռքը կտրված, ոտքը կտրված, մարդիկ, որ բան չեն կարողանում հասկանալ։
Ինչո՞մ լացել ես։
Չեմ լացել։
Չէ։
Ես չեմ լացել իմ ընկերոջ դեպքից հետո։
Մահացել է։
Հա։ Այդ դեպքից հետո էլ չեմ լացել։
Այս վերջի մեկ տարվա մեջ քո կյանքը ինչպես եղել է։
Իմ կյանքը այդքան էլ ուրախ չի եղել։ Դե այցելելով ընկերներիդ գերեզմաններին, լիքը մարդկանց, որ դեռ չէին գտել, արդեն ուղիղ մի տարի անցել է էլի, օրի մեր ընկերների տարիներն է լռանում արդեն, վիրավոր տղաներին։
Քո ապագան ինչպես ես տեսնում։
Իմ ապագան տեսնում եմ էլի դժվարությամբ, որ ինչ-որ մի բանի հասնեմ, բայց նախքան կռիվը ես ուրիշ ձև էի պատկերացնում։ Բայց հիմա հասկանում եմ, որ եթե Աստված քեզ հնարավորություն է տալիս, դու այդ հնարավորությունը պիտի օգտագործես։
Of course, there's a genocide. There's a slaughter. I think what's happened now is in Artsakh, it was actually kind of a plan. It was a plan from the beginning.
We should push this administration to use the Magnitsky sanctions against individuals responsible for terrible human rights abuses.
Պարոն Մարոկյան, այս րոպեին, որ դուք կանգնած եք, շատ բաներ կա, որ դեռ կախ վիճակի վրա է կռվից հետո, որոշ չափով դեռ կռիվը չի վերջացել, եւ հիմա Հայաստանը վտանգի մեջ է։ Ինչ եք կարծում։ Ձեր մտածածը այս րոպեին ինչ է։
Բացի որ պատերազմ ա եղել, բացի որ այդ պատերազմում մենք պարտվել ենք, բացի որ հիմա Հայաստանի սահմանները վտանգված են, մեր մարտահրավերները շատ մեծ են։ Մեր մարտահրավերներն ավելի մեծ են, քան մեր բյուջեն է եւ քան մեր կարողություններն ընդհանրապես։
It's that simple. For us, this is existence. It's all about being able to live and retain our cultural heritage on our homeland. For them, it's just continuation of what they've done for the last 1,000 years, which is expand on territories that they're guests on.
I do believe that we need to punish Azerbaijan and Turkey for their acts of aggression, that we should cut off all military aid to Azerbaijan and rethink our relationship with Turkey in general. And we need to, protect what is left of Nagorno-Karabakh. And I really worry about those monasteries, which were the earliest signs of the cradle of Christianity, and somehow having them lost in this process.
Հոգեկանդ մի շատ լավ է, շատ ամեն ինչը իր լավն ստեսնում, էդի որը էցա գալի։
Ես եթե անկեղծ պատասխանեմ, ես ուղղակի չեմ ուզում ցույց տամ այն ինչ կա։ Երբ որ դու ցույց ես տալիս քո մեջ եղած ցավը, քո թուլությունը, այդ ժամանակ դու մարդկանց համար թույլ ես երևում, իսկ ես թույլ չեմ եղել, որ ինչ-որ միտեղ թույլ երևամ։ Եթե ես սկսեմ այդ ամեն ինչը ցույց տալ, մարդիկ կսկսեն ինձ ուղղակի խղճալ, իսկ այդ իմ համար ամենասխալն է։ Ու նույնն էլ մեր երկրի վիճակն է։ Ամբողջ աշխարհը աչք փակեց այն ամեն ինչի վրա, ինչ որ եղավ։
It was not the first time that we were left alone. And it's not going to be the first time. When we stand back up, you are an activist and you know this. You have struggled on several causes that just a decade or two ago would have been unfathomable, the kind of achievements that we have made over the past couple of decades. And ultimately, the shape we give to the present is what in the future is going to be called history.
I have an enormous respect and affection for the people of Artsakh. I wasn't into politics. As the first Baroness I'd ever met. So how do I use this privilege? And the idea came very clearly. It's a wonderful place to be a voice for people whose voices are not heard. Yes. And the evidence of attempted ethnic cleansing, genocide, whatever you like, but certainly of war crimes and crimes against humanity are very, very available. Evidence is there and powerful and incontrovertible.
Եթե մոքի նայում այս րոպեին, որ հայ չի, ինչ ուզես որ իրանք իմանան։
Իմանան, որ հայերը շատ լավ ազգ են, մենք շատ դժվարությունների մեջով ենք անցել դարերի վեր, ու մնացել են կանգում, թող գան բոլորը տեսնեն Հայաստանը, տեսնեն ինչքան լավ ազգ ենք մենք։
Երկրագնդում կա այսպիսի երկիր, որ ուզում են խաղաղ ապրել։ Իրենք միշտ մենք դուխով ենք, մենք միշտ մեր ընտանիքների, մեր երկրի համար կռիվ կտանք։ Բայց մենք ուզում ենք խաղաղություն, ուրախություն։
On May 20th, 2021, the European Court of Human Rights found Azerbaijani authorities guilty of torturing Alexander Lapshin and trying to kill him in Baku prison in 2017. The court said in a unanimous ruling that Baku must pay compensation of 30,000 euros to Lapshin, who was detained in Belarus in 2016 and extradited to Azerbaijan for having traveled to Artsakh. In October 2021, the Grand Chamber upheld the original judgment and rejected Azerbaijan's appeal against the ruling in the case. In September 2021, Armenia instituted proceedings against Azerbaijan with the International Court of Justice on the basis of violation of the Convention on Elimination of Racial Discrimination. On December 2021, the ICJ indicated provisional measures in that case, ordering that Azerbaijan must take all necessary measures to prevent and punish acts of vandalism and desecration affecting the Armenian cultural heritage, including but not limited to churches and other places of worship, monuments, landmarks, cemeteries, and artifacts. But Azerbaijan continues to violate ICJ's orders with impunity. History repeats itself, and this time it didn't take long. Russia's President Vladimir Putin, a man that is a party to the threat facing Artsakh, unleashed his own brutal assault on Ukraine in 2022. There are many parallels between what happened to Artsakh and Ukraine, an attack that was a precursor to the offensive against Ukraine. We'll never know if Putin would have dared to unleash his fury had the West intervened and tried to stop Azerbaijan in 2020. You are now a witness to war crimes and crimes against humanity, against the Armenian people, who for thousands of years have lived on the plateau of Mount Ararat, where Noah's Ark landed. Likely, you are non-Armenian, or one of 10 million Armenians scattered worldwide following the genocide, 1.3 million in the United States alone. You've seen how rogue regimes are determined to exterminate the Armenians again. This time, the indigenous population of Artsakh from their ancestral lands and strip them of their right to self-determination. Daily attacks, not just on Artsakh, but against Armenians continue. Having seen with your own eyes, it's up to you now. Will you speak for people robbed of their voice? Or will you turn away, back to your life of comfort, far from the indiscriminate shells falling on Artsakh? Will the world break its silence and speak out? Not just for me or you, but for humanity and the right for peace on this planet? Someone once said, if nothing changes, nothing changes. It means that we need to do things differently to achieve different results. But will we?